guys today. I'm going to start just by how I met Steve, which I think is a good story. I was out South by Southwest this year, as people are known to do, and walking really to like a far distant corner of the festival to try and go to the Tennessee House, way deep on Congress. And Steve stopped me dead in my tracks. He saw my badge and, saw the ad podcast and asked me about it. And we struck up a little conversation, and we spent about, 10, 20 minutes just riffing, and really loved his energy, loved his vibe, loved his story. And I think that's the magic of South by. I think that is why South by is the best conference, because it's the one where you get the most of that kind of magic juju, where you just, you meet somebody that you never were meant to meet before, in the middle of Congress Street. So Steve, thanks for stopping me dead in my tracks and having a fun conversation. So
yeah,
with
welcome.
that, Steve Schofield, universally known in the industry as Scof, is a high-octane creative strategist and producer, and the founder and chief creative officer of Schofield's Flowers. He is widely regarded as a one-man headline machine with a career that spans law enforcement, visual effects, and groundbreaking advertising. The Schofield Flowers legacy, he reacquired the brand in 2019, and he revived the family business name, which was originally a Chicago flower shop founded in 1924 by his grandfather and famously linked to the North Side Mob. He transitioned it into a ModOp creative solution studio, where the agency specializes in possible experiential projects, content creation, and social media activation. Before launching his current shop, Scof was a major player in the Hollywood production scene. He co-founded and executive produced at Zoic Studios, where he helped lead the commercial division and work on iconic projects like Joss Whedon's Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Angel, and Firefly. He also held leadership roles at other standout firms like Radium and ModOp. He has been the driving force behind several of the most famous ad campaigns in history, including the original BMW film series The Hire with David Fincher, the Mini Cooper robot hoax with Crispin Porter and Bogusky, and HP's Picture Book campaign. Under Schofield's Flowers banner, he has executed massive activations for brands like Netflix, building a museum during the COVID-19 pandemic, Adidas Halo Top, which he managed 70 activations across 15 cities. His background is famously eclectic. He started as a deputy sheriff in the Cook County Sheriff's Department before transitioning into comedy improv and eventually the top tiers of advertising and visual effects. Scof is known for his all-in mentality. Early in the BMW Films project, he famously invested $20,000 of his own money into storyboards to keep the project moving when directors were too busy to commit. Scof, thanks so much, man. Really excited to have you come on and talk to the audience a little bit about your history and, your family history even, and all the cool things you have going on today. So, we'll get into a little bit of the South by Southwest magic, because I think that's maybe an important thing to at least touch on. But more importantly, we talked a little bit about your family history, but, tell us about growing up on the South Side of Chicago, your grandfather's flower shop, and kind of a little bit of the urban legend that goes in and around that. And then how did you transition from that world into law enforcement first, but then eventually end up in the advertising and special effects industry?
Yeah, I thank you. That intro, I might as well just have a mic and just drop it. I couldn't get it back. Can I just take you everywhere with me?
Let's go. Let's go.
I know we're going to become good friends after this, because the last guy I met the year before was Brad Bird, who's a singer. He's just an amazing artist. And I met him on the corner, and he lives in Joshua Tree, and we just hang out all the time now. And
wow.
So it's funny how you do meet great people, there. It's my favorite place to go, period. There's nothing better. Coachella used to be fun, but now there's too many people, and Cannes was great, and Sundance was great, but then it just grew and grew and grew, so, the family side of things, as a kid, I grew up in this great flower shop. Actually started in 1896 by my grandfather.
Wow.
Yeah. And then he met O'Banion in 1922. And O'Banion became his partner. He needed a front. And back in the 20s, man, it was a tough times. I mean, there was, the rich and the poor. There was no even middle class. There were no. You had to go to a restroom in a bathhouse. Shower there. People didn't have running water in their homes at the time yet. Maybe some did, but Schofield's was the very first to have electricity. Flowers was the first place to have electricity in 1920s.
Holy cow!
Yeah. So they met. Next thing you know, they're in business to be partners, and they had the upstairs room, the bedrooms up there, and that was their front up there, and it was a money laundering, but the cash was good, and millions of dollars going through a year. And my grandfather became a huge socialite because of that, with my grandmother Nellie Malloy. My grandfather was called Big Bill, and there's only two people that were called Big anything. That was Al Capone and my grandfather, Big Bill. So, he was like the wizard behind the curtain. He wound up. He was also the biggest bookie probably at the time in the country, and so he knew where the money was. So nobody was going to fuck with him, in plain English. And him and O'Banion became solid partners. And then, unfortunately, the wars between the liquor and everything else happened between, with territory and everything, North Side. So they were the North Side gang, and the South Side, the North Side gang. Then the South Side was controlled by Capone. And, it was a problem with who's stealing whose liquor back in the day. And you see it in all the movies and everything, the bootlegging and that. And then Capone came in, and his guys came in, Frankie Yell and his partners came in and shook O'Banion's hands and killed him in the flower shop in 1924.
Crazy.
Crazy times. Then in and then Jaime the Pole Weiss took over the gang along with Bugs Moran. Jaime was killed in 1926 coming out of the Holy Name Cathedral church on his steps. Jaime was famous for going in. He was Jewish and Catholic. He had a Catholic father, Jewish mother. So he would go across the street. He was a hitman, and he would go across the street and pray for his sins and go into confession with the priest and slip him a hundo underneath the screen. And he'd get less Our Fathers and less Hail Marys and every day. And he went to noon mass. So they knew his MO. And the next thing you know, he's coming down the stairs and they gunned him down. So he was gone. That's 24. And then the rest of the gang was killed in the St. Valentine's Massacre in 1926. And, so when you grow up in a flower shop like that, later on, my grandfather died in early 50s. I was born late 50s. And then my dad stayed into the business. And my dad wound up running the shop. And of course, you hear everything about, everything that ever happened with the gangsters in the shop and the famous, whatever it was. But in all honesty, it was something that my dad really hated because it sort of put the stigma on situation. And he had a little bit of a hiccup too, where he became a bookie. and he wound up getting caught by the FBI and Sting, and he wound up going to jail where the guys went for Watergate around the same time. So, wow. And the judge that sentenced him, and he wasn't supposed to be sentenced, was Judge Julius Hoffman, who was the judge for the trial of Chicago 7 for Netflix. And that's the reason I got the call, because people knew I knew Chicago and I knew the history. And that's when I built out that experience for Netflix and Grant Park. So crazy how things, transfer for how many years, right? And so, but as a kid, I was delivering flowers to Zsa Zsa Gabor. Sinatra would come in, you name it, Dean Martin, all the time, Charlie Trippi, Bears quarterback, Cardinals quarterback, George Connors. Everybody came through the door. So it was a great place to grow up. I used to deliver flowers to Sam Giancana, the head of the Chicago mob. And he was dating Marilyn Monroe at the same time that Kennedy was, and John F. Kennedy, and I think Bobby was dating her too at the same time. So crazy, what she went through. And then I would be asked, and my dad would say, "Hey, kid, you got to go across the street and deliver some flowers to Sammy G. Make sure you wear a pocket shirt because you see him and he's going to give you a hundo." So I went over there at Sammy. I get patted down. I'm 15, 14, 16, 17. I knew him for years. It was like an uncle to me, basically. I'd walk in and he'd be sitting there with his top hat, his tie perfectly, smoking a cigar with a beautiful woman, which he would call the dame. And he can't even say that now, right? So he would say, "Hey, Junior, come here." and he called me Junior. How you doing, kid? I'm doing good, Mr. Giancana. He said, look at me and I go, Sammy G. He says, who calls me that? I go, you're my dad, or my dad and I, right? And the next thing you know, he'd say, all right, kid, give the flowers to the dame. So I had the flowers, and of course, she's bursting out of her dress, and I'm a 14-year-old kid, and he'd yell at me and say, hey, Junior, eyes let. And I was like, sorry, Sammy, I got carried away. He goes, yeah, you did. Give me a hug. And he put a hundo in my pocket. And then he'd ask me, I'd go to leave, and he'd say, oh, Junior, come here. Are you on your feet or on your bike? I'd say, I'm on my feet. Can you run fast? I said, I'm the fastest runner you ever know. And he says, take this envelope down to the laundromat. And back in the day, it would say, take this back to the Chinaman. Other things you got to be careful of saying anything like that now, So I would do that. And so I guess I was running numbers at 14 without knowing that I was running numbers at 14, 15, and 16 when you give me a package. But yeah, so then my dad died, unfortunately, at 19. And I wound up taking over the shop with my mom, and I just didn't want to do it. My dad kept on always saying to me, listen, you don't have to take this over. I've been here. I got stuck here because my dad was playing pro ball with the Cardinals and the minors, and then during the Depression. So he had us later in life. And so he just like, kid, I don't want you to take it over if you don't want it. So 18th District was right around the corner from our shop. And literally on the holidays, my dad would call the sergeant at the desk and say, I need help. Send some guys over. And we'd have a caravan of 1820 squad cars behind the shop, and we'd take the package with deliveries on the holidays. That's what their route was as a policeman. What are you patrolling? You got the Gold Coast, you got the highway. What do you got? And then we put the flowers, and they get $5 a delivery plus their tips. And they put on a jacket, like a baseball jacket over, because they always went to the bar after their shift. So they have a snap jacket like we wear as skateboarders, And the next thing they're doing it, and they're patrolling. They're just also making some money while they're patrolling, delivering flowers for Schofields. So I became I went to see Eddie Kelly, who was the head of the Chicago Park District, and he was a great friend of my father's. And he was at my dad's funeral, and I said, Eddie, I want to get on the police department, but they got a lot of situations going down where they're hiring some specific people and things like that. There was a hiring freeze. He says, how about you want to get on the sheriff's department? He said, policeman's being a policeman. I said, yeah. He says, I'll get you on. I'll make a call. And next thing I know was, I had to take the test, and I did really well. He moved me up the ladder a little bit through politics. And next thing you know, I was on the police department and did that for 7 years.
That's crazy. So what made you decide to kind of hang it up as a cop, and how the heck did you transition from that into the world of Hollywood and advertising and all that good stuff?
Well, while I was on the job, I wound up being asked I went into the squad room, and they always have bulletin board up there, cork board, and I saw they needed help for they wanted a police officer for a documentary on what to do in case of a bank robbery. Well, I'd caught a couple of bank robbers previously,
wow.
So, get a call, we caught him, so the next thing you know, you're being involved in so I signed up, and the captain calls me in the office. He goes, Scof, get in here. I go, yeah, what's going on, Billy? And he's like, looks at me like, Billy? I'm like, sorry, Cap. Because I grew up with the guy, trained the guy and everything, and he's now the captain. And because I like being a beat cop. I like being in a tactical car or whatever, So he's like, what? You're the only guy that signed up for this police industrial. Now you're going to be in charge. And now you can't make me look bad. You understand what I'm saying? I say, I got your back. I got your back. So I wound up, I said, let me think about how I want to do it. He says, here, this is the company that's going to be videoing it. I would kill to get that video. I have no idea who they are to this day, So I go in, talk to him and everything. And I said, okay, I got an idea how we do it. So I picked 2 female officers that were taller than the male officers. And I put us all in dungarees and ski masks and everything, so you couldn't see us. And I had them do all the talking in the bank. And so we robbed everybody was staged. We had ambulance there. We had everything in case somebody got, sick or, started hyperventilating or whatever. And sure enough, one of the girls did after it, because the way I went in, I played the lead robber, and the girls did all the talking. And if we said, bang, you're dead, that type of thing. And squad cars had to respond. It was like, you got a code 3, and code 3, everybody knew that was a bank robbery that was being staged for the whole thing. I fell in love with it. I called my sister, who was dating a guy that was best friends with the stage manager from Second City. And I told her I wanted to get into acting. She says, Stephen, you should come down to Second City and see it. I tell you, I think you could do well. I went down to see it. I looked down the row at her and I said, Sandy, I could do this in a heartbeat. Del Close had come back from Saturday Night Live. He was the director at Second City for 7 years. Then he went to Saturday Night Live for 7, and he came back to Second City. And I started studying with him there, and then one thing led to another, where he started Improv Olympics with Sharna Halpern. I went over to do Improv Olympics with him. Had a great group called But Seriously Folks that I put together. And I think one of the other reasons, I was always writing comedy in a squad car. And I pulled next to my buddy, JJ Paris, who was a state trooper in the area off the highway, and we backed each other up because you're a lone car out in the county, stuff like that. And I said, Jay, you would not believe what I just dealt with a domestic. It was just absolutely crazy. He said, you should have seen the nut I was just dealing with, because you just see the craziest things. So I was always writing comedy. And the next thing you know, I'm like, loving, I get into the improv. I love it. And then instead of cops and robbers, I go to producers from ad agencies, art directors, writers, creative directors, and that. Used to go to the classes and everything, became good friends. And a buddy of mine I got to know said, dude, you should get into advertising. You can make a lot more money than you'll ever make as a policeman. How much you making? I'm like, I don't know, like 30,000, but overtime. And he's like, dude, you can make 300,000 in 2-3 years. And sure enough, I got into advertising and started representing a guy by the name of Sandy Ostroff, a fashion photographer who's still one of my best friends in life. And I can remember I learned a big lesson from Bob Carey, who was a big EP at Leo Burnett. I brought Sandy's fashion book in to see Marlboro client. He's like, dude, he's like, are you kidding me? He said, how long have you been doing this, kid? I said, about a week. He goes, let me give you a few lessons. I remember that story to the day I die, because I like giving back, right? And giving back to the community, giving back to the kids. And I've had so many kids come through my house. I have 4 kids, 7 grandkids now. And half of the kids that's ever come through my house, and it was at my wife's celebration of life last year. My wife passed of cancer. I put kids into animation. They're producers. They're everything in the business, architects, you name it. So I've always been one to like give back to the kids and help them grow. So yeah, here I am. Yeah. I am now, and
that's pretty wild. So how long was it from when you started working in kind of the ad agency world of Chicago, kind of transferring the skill set from the improv world and the relationships that you were building with other creatives in the comedy space? When did you kind of move that into some of the, these big campaigns, like with BMW Films with David Fincher and the Mini Cooper work with Crispin Porter, because eventually you got into more traditional Hollywood stuff too, really running the VFX side of Buffy and some of these bigger shows. So give me a little bit of the kind of like, when did you transition from kind of this Chicago ad world into some of these more Hollywood type companies and roles?
I was doing really well. I started doing really well as a rep, and then became a partner with a guy by the name of Rich Trenbeth. Great. Unfortunately, he's passed, but we just had the funniest company. We were called But Serious. We were called Who Are These Guys? He was 6'5", I'm 5'7", or 6'4", and I'm 5'7". And we walked down, and we always had these crazy. We'd always wear black and everything, and then people were like, "Who are these guys walking down the street?" His his daughter was an artist. She was an artist at like 8 years old. She did these little like characters of us, and then we became these characters on our cards, and then we had Who Are These Guys on our t-shirts. They just went off the chain, right? Everybody wanted these, and then we had parties, and like, oh my god, I hope 50 people show, and there was 500 people show, and to this pool party we had at our place in 10 East Ontario. So we just started doing well, and the next thing you know, I had Jenkins, Cummington, Newman, and Rath, one of the best companies in the business out of New York. Tim Newman did I Love LA. I launched Tim big time. He had some drug issues back in the day in the 80s. And so, I launched him. They told me, they swear to God, he was off everything. And I said, great. And they said, we really need somebody to, get this guy going again, because he's an incredible rock and roll director. So I brought him to, I got in to see Ray Lyle and a couple other people in St. Louis and got him the first big Budweiser campaign for Bud to the Bone with George Thorogood and things like that. So I started doing well. A company out of LA called me called Intravision. Tom Nod was the owner. They did Stand By Me. Remember the kids? I don't know if you ever saw Stand By Me, but the kids.
Oh yeah, I love that movie.
Running down the railroad tracks. So that was that was a mirrored effect that they would do, and he swore it was better than green screen and everything else. And he said to me, "I'm really interested in you representing the company." I said, "Tom, have you ever done a commercial?" He's like, "No, but I can do them." And I said, "All right, well, I believe in you, but you know, who would I deal with there that's going to do all the bids and everything?" He said, "Well," I said, "I need a real EP, like an exec producer in LA." And he's like, "Well, I don't have one. How about you just move out here and be the EP?" And I like, "Well, Tom, I got 4 kids. I got 3 kids with a 4th on the way." I said, "It's going to be a little hard." And I just built a beautiful home and, you know, outside of Chicago and up by in Hoffman Estates next to Inverness. And he said, "I don't care. I'm going to fly you out. I'm sending you a ticket." He said, next thing you know, I'm on a plane, first class, flying out there to go see him. And he makes me an offer I can't refuse.
Wow.
It's like, and I just said, "Honey," I called my wife. I said, "We're moving to LA." She's like, "Oh my," but you know, she's like, "No, we're not." And I'm like, she's super close to her family, 6 brothers and sisters. Next thing I'm in LA, I was with him for a year. The day he was a screamer. And I just wouldn't take it. And the day my wife came out with the kids, we sold our house. She did everything, pregnant and everything. I would fly back every couple of weeks or every month and whatever. And literally, she was a superstar. And literally, when she landed and we got to the little house in Sherman Oaks, that she was like, "Are you kidding me? This is only 1,600 square feet." And it's double the price that we had we were paying for a mortgage and we're renting. What? And I'm like, it turned out to be the best neighborhood. And I quit my job that day. So
wow.
we had 30,000 in the bank, and I was like, you know what? It's time to go to work. So I moved my repping company. I was a rep. I moved my repping company to LA, and I would just go back and forth.
And when you say rep, that's kind of like a traditional director rep house.
I'm sorry, I didn't make that clear. I got into repping, and that's what a lot of people said. You'd be a great rep. So I started repping photographers, illustrators, and then I got the call from Jenkins Covington. Then I got a call from another director company, and
then basically the way that works is you represent kind of a freelance portfolio of hired guns. You bring those guys into the big shops. Yep. They kind of get pulled in for project work, and they get paid a pretty penny for their time.
Back in the day, they got paid a really pretty penny.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, especially if they're coming off hot, like music videos or movies or fashion campaigns. It's like those are the guys you want kind of rotating in and out of your advertising work.
Yeah, I mean, I went from with Tim. I went from Bubba Bud to the Bone, the Heartbeat of America, like a truck, you know. And then that went to an entire campaign for Chrysler with 2 directors, with Henry Trenton and Tim doing it. And then it just kept on snowballing, you know. So yeah, and then the offer came to me, and I made the move. And then next thing I know, I was in design and visual effects, and I loved that area. And because of my background of growing up in a flower shop and going into these beautiful homes as a kid and everything, I just saw a lot of beautiful design in homes and architecture. And Chicago in itself is a beautiful place. If you've never been on the architectural tour, you got to take it.
Yeah, I've been to a few, Modernism Week, Palm Springs, and I've done like the Chicago Lake Boat Tour where the guy takes you out on the lake and he talks about all the buildings, but then you're only looking at it from, you're looking at it from far away at the outside. It's like, so Chicago's such a, historic city with such beautiful buildings and, probably only second to New York, maybe not even, maybe, comparable, right? So I love that. So then you kind of transitioned into more of the VFX and like designing sets and stuff like that with Zoic. And then
I actually started with
tell me about that.
Yeah, it started with Radium. I wound up becoming I moved through the system of moving over to POP back in the day, Pacific Ocean Post, and then Riot took it over, and we all, just like we're seeing with all these mergers right now, all the mergers were happening with Ford Media Group and everything else with all the post companies. So I moved through the post thing, became the head of POP, marketing and everything. They had like 5 divisions there. And then I had Lonnie and Chris were my guys that I had met, and they were, my flame artist and my visual effects supervisor, and we were working on projects, and we started to blow up as a team together. We started doing all these great projects because now I'm like reaching out to everybody. I'm getting to know all these great clients and things like that. And next thing you know, we're doing $1 million campaigns, and they approached me and said, "Hey, listen, we're not too happy here. We'd like to bust a move." And I said, "Yeah, we're all right. Let's do it." And so we hooked up with Radium, built out Radium's west side facility in Santa Monica. They were a San Francisco company, and I worked with a lot of great people there. And then, we just felt like we were moving faster than most companies at the time as a threesome that we had going on as a creative and supervisor. And we wound up having a script even just before we left to move over to Radium. We had a script thrown on our desk from one of a guy that ran the company. He says, "Hey, I got this crazy script. It's called Buffy the Vampire." And I don't know. It's like, I don't think this thing's going to go anywhere. And he throws it and he says, "Take a read and let me know. They only got music video rates. See, let me know if you guys want to work on it. It's going to be a lot of overtime, but I can't pay you overtime. But if you want to work on it," it's like, okay, let us read it. We read it. We all came back. I'm like, "Oh my God, this is the greatest script we've ever read. We got to do this no matter what it takes." Well, we did, and we became Josh's go-to. And then when we busted a move to Radium, he went with us.
Wow.
And then, yeah. And then when we busted it, then we decided that we wanted to start our own thing. And Zoic was, we got down to the Z's for naming the company. We had a million. One was, the last two were Big Hug and Zoic. And Lonnie and Chris ran that. They ran the TV division while I started running the commercial division. So the very first, so we came over to Radium, and the next thing you know, we've got Buffy now. We know Angel's coming, and then I'm like, I got to go find some commercial work now for the LA office, and we got to get that going. We got 3.5 of us. We got a part-time secretary that's working with us, Lizzie, who's in London now and still best friends with her. And next thing you know, it's like I get a call from Andy Trainus over at Anonymous, and he says, "Dude, I got this crazy," because I worked with Propaganda Anonymous on post with POP and different directors like Fincher and everybody. He says, like, "Fincher got this project and he's on Panic Room right now, and he can't direct it, but he's got this idea." Fallon hit him up for for one 25-minute film that they want to do on the internet. He starts laughing. "Can you believe anybody wants to do anything on the internet?" Oh my God, what are they, fucking crazy? And he said, "But would you come over here? Can you bring an artist?" And I said, "Yeah." So I asked Hardaway, this artist with me, Andrew Hardaway. I said, "Hardaway, come on. Andy wants to see us over at Anonymous." They had just started it. And Jeffrey Plansker gave it the name, and crazy stuff. Jeff's dad was my mentor at Chevy, and Jeff's still a dear friend of mine. And he was a Propaganda for many years. And so, and I tell Andrew, we're meeting with Fincher. He's like, "Fincher? Oh my, Fincher?" I was like, "Yeah, come on, just bring your sketchbook. Let's go." We didn't have computers yet, I don't think. We did, but we were like, it was like, playing Pong. We go there, Andy. I said, "Listen, go in." We get there, and I said, "Hey, Andrew, go in the room. David, what's up? Go in the room with David and figure out what he wants to do." Andy tells me that David came up with the idea that they, instead of doing a 25-minute film, do 5 films and 5-minute films, 3 minutes, 3.5, whatever, and then bring in top directors. So the directors were Jonathan Frankenheimer, Ang Lee, Guy Ritchie, Wong Kar-wai, WKW they called him, and then Alejandro. I can never say his last name properly, but I heard and they're all Oscar winners.
Yeah, that's crazy.
French Connection.
People forget how iconic that campaign was.
Oh my God. It was to this day, I'll have people say to me when they hear that I did that, "You're the reason I got into advertising."
Wow.
And that's a nice compliment.
Yep.
So yeah, that started after you got that one in, you're golden. And that started my career taking off. And next thing you know, we're, doing bigger, better campaigns. Led to HP, led to, Mini Cooper Robot was a fun one. That was no money. Basically, Boguski said, "Hey, I'll throw 30 grand in if you throw 30 grand in time." And if we do this, I promise you're going to win a ton of awards. And that's exactly what we did. And we crushed it.
That's crazy.
And even when I was doing the BMW thing, Andy said, so he came out and I got in the car with Hardaway and I said, what's your thoughts on this? And he goes, I don't know. He says, man, it's a lot. I drew some stuff. But he said, what if we did all the storyboards for everything? These directors are so big, they don't have time. We got to do them. He goes, I think that's a great idea, Scof. So I told Andy, I'm going to do the storyboards on this. And he said, I don't have any money. And I says, well, I think it's the only way it's going to push through, Andy. So I went back to Jonathan Keaton, who was running Radium, and I said, hey, listen, I think we can, this campaign, I think we can win it if we do the storyboards. And then he goes, well, how much is that going to cost? I said, probably 20 grand. He's like, 20 grand. He goes, Scof, I hired you to make me money, not spend money. And I told him, I said, if you do this, I said, I'll do it. I'll do this camp. I'll pay for it. But if I win it and it's too big, I get to push out all the other stuff. And he goes, you got your 20 grand. And we got that fucking job. Excuse me.
Wow. No, I love it.
It was, next thing you know, we were rocking and rolling. That was a year project.
That's pretty wild. So, obviously had an amazing run out in LA working on these iconic campaigns and these great agencies and producing all this good work. So, obviously you are in kind of a new chapter of your life with Schofield's Flowers. Tell me a little bit about, what happened in LA, and then how did I, meet you years later on the streets of Austin? Because you live in Austin now, right?
Huh?
You live in Austin now, right?
No, I'm in LA.
Oh, interesting. Okay, never mind.
I stay in Austin a lot. I got a dear friend there that I met, no different than meeting you.
Wow.
We became best friends, and she has had a great boyfriend that. They're just really, Jill and Alex are two of my dearest friends, and they live, in a beautiful home. He runs a big financial group in Rockefeller. And so he's ex-West Point guy. And I don't know, it just became best friends. Next thing I know, I'm in Austin all the time, and they got a big house above they got a penthouse, like a place over the garage and everything, and I go there, and so I know Austin really well.
For some reason I thought that you were an Austin guy, but that makes sense now. So you stayed out in LA since you moved out from the Chicago days. You've stayed out since.
Yeah. I've been out here 37 years.
Wow.
37, and raised a beautiful family. Great kids, great grandkids. Now it's this is definitely probably my last chapter. I hope not. I just started a spirits company, so that'll be my next chapter down the road. But Schofield's just Schofield's. I just kept on. I started ModOp with a group of guys that we left Zoic. Yeah, and ModOp is a digital company. I named it. It's called, the real name is Modus Operandi, and we were just starting in the digital world. So the idea was, what's your MO for digital for your company?
I like that. That's good position.
Very well. I did that for about 5 years, and I just got to the point where, and then we started the film side, ModOp Films, and that became a traditional commercial company to do the content for the digital and everything. And, I just got to the point where I have enough partners in my life, and I just wanted to do something on my own. And I kept on thinking about my origin story and how I grew up. And it was like Schofield's Flowers, became the name,
That's so cool.
Yeah. So I did a speakeasy. And when I launched the company, I wrote a short story book that really was in between two beer coasters. And I wound up launching that with cartoons and different things of my life and everything, little sketches and everything, brought in a great illustrator, and that became the handoff. And then I opened it up in a speakeasy, and had burlesque, and had it just built out a flower shop and a gift store, and had everything from hats to T-shirts with my face on it to you name it. I had it all, beanies, you name it. So next thing you know, I'm just, that's how I launched. And then I started doing these speakeasy type get-togethers that were more like mixers, and a lot of people would come and shake hands. And one thing led to the next. I had Brian Jarman walked up to me, and he was a big producer. He was at Chiat, and then he was working over at with the guys over at Media Monks. Actually, they were with Circus Advertising that got acquired by Media Monks. And he said, Steve, I had such a great time at your place at this pop-up that I do a lot of pop-ups at Lunetta all day in Santa Monica because he's got a speakeasy. And I said, Mike, let me have this. Why don't you just give me this back speakeasy for my office during the day? He says, why don't you give me $1 million and I'll give it to you. You know? I'm like, dude, I mean, this could be, you go, why don't you start doing some, do something here? Why don't you give me some money? Why don't you start doing some, have some fun with it? So that's what I did. And on Valentine's Day for the St. Valentine's Massacre when was it? It was 19. It was 2020.
Wow.
It was right before COVID. He had this walkway in the back area, and I had the speakeasy, and I had burlesque, and I built out a flower shop outside, and all my clients showed up, and they bought $2,000 worth of flowers that day. So it was fun. And then from that, it transitioned into the party. And then Brian came out. He was there, I think, the whole freaking day. And he's like, dude, if I ever got a pop-up or anything that's experiential, I'm going to call you. Because I was just really wasn't doing much. I had some money in the bank and I was trying to figure it out, to be honest.
Yeah, well, you almost, created an experiential activation for your own agency, which is it's pretty over the top, agencies are sometimes known for having pretty cool launch parties and doing fun things for themselves, but sometimes we also say oh, well, we do great work for other clients, but we don't drink our own Kool-Aid, so to speak. And it seems like you really went above and beyond to create a creative experience for the advertising industry, especially the LA market, to really show them what you're all about, show them what this brand means to you, the personal connection. But really, I think a lot of people forget that. I talked to an advertising leader the other day who said, we've lost the art of the call that we have with the client each week. The 1 hour we spend with a client each week should be the best hour of their week.
Yeah,
and I think a lot of people have lost that, lost touch of that.
I'm writing that one down. You'll have to let me know offline.
Right. I will.
Because that's great. I mean,
great guy. Actually, I'll tell you, it's the current managing director of Forsman Bendorf in New York. That's really his. I'll look it up and send you that episode. But he's
that's great. I mean, and then from that, for me, Brian said to me, "Hey, if I ever have anything pop up, I'll let you know." And COVID hit in March, and I wound up doing some different campaigns online because I had that experience of doing visual effects and design and everything like that. And next thing you know, it's like he says, "Hey, listen, we're in a pickle, man. We got a project with Netflix, and we can't figure out what to do with it because we were going to launch it. They were going to launch it in a museum in Chicago, and then that canceled because nobody was going to museums. We were going to be able to do it in a train station. We can't do it at the airport. Any ideas?" And I said, "Yeah, why don't you just build it outside where the event happened?" And he said, because he had 5 photos from Getty that were worth, they paid $100,000 for each photo.
Holy cow.
And he said, "God, well, what about rain and graffiti?" And, I said, we'll blow them up and make them huge, large scale, 10 by 5. And we'll take that and then we'll put it in between plexiglass. It'll be waterproof. And then we'll hire security around the clock, which is like $20 an hour for 3 security guys to walk the perimeter. And it'll be fantastic. And it turned out to be one of the greatest. To me, it's as big as anything I've ever done. I love it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And, we talked a little bit about in your intro, you've kind of built a reputation for yourself of creating these, impossible experiential activations. I think if anything, going back to South by for the first time post-pandemic, in this world where we're just inundated with AI companies, AI emails, AI LinkedIn, AI videos in our social media feeds.
Yeah.
Everybody is yearning for real, whether it's, I work for a company that produces books again, like premium prints. You've got kids going and hanging out at the mall, the box office is up. People are back in movie theaters.
Yeah.
People, they don't care if we're headed for a recession or a world war. They're going to Coachella. They're paying the $900 for the ticket.
Yeah.
People are hungry for real world experiences. They're hungry for real, and they're hungry for a community, things that they can feel, touch, and see, and that they can trust. How important do you think the experiential world is right now, where we sit in the marketing story or the evolution of marketing, where on one side you've got AI and everything is very kind of like esoteric, and it's almost hard to trust your senses in the digital world. But if you go in the real world, you can still trust your eyes, your smell, your taste, your senses.
Oh, I mean, to me, it's like I just got off the phone with two huge restaurateurs that I work with a gentleman. I work with Brad Stewart as a consultant, and he is literally owns one of the. He's probably ranked in the top 3 in the world for his place called Caravan Outpost, and Caravan Outpost is in Ojai, and he's yeah, and it's beautiful. If to anybody in the audience, if you haven't that sees this video, if you've never been to Caravan Outpost, you have to check it out. So it's a glamping. It's 12 Airstreams in Ojai, and I've watched them build it from the very beginning. But and then I talked with another gentleman, Brian Lenzo, who owns Blue Palms, and we were just on a call about a project that we're talking about, and one thing led to another. Where experiences is everything right now. I think people are dying for experience. They need to see something. Like when you walk in a restaurant, we were talking about how is the lighting in there? How is the smell? How is the service? How is when you sit down? Is the music too high? Is it just right? It's just everything. So yeah, so it's for me, I think it's a $130 billion industry, experiential world, and now AI is coming, and we're heavily involved in AI right now. And with I mean, I was just when I was at in January, what's the big event in January in Vegas? I can't think.
CES, the electronic show.
Yeah, thank you. CES. I mean, I did the best experience I was in was the LG area, and they got TVs. They're called wallpaper. They're that thin, right? So how do you take and create, an experience with the wallpaper TVs, and then you have the music that is insane. I'm going to a couple music places in Tokyo where you go in a room and it's just like the music's supposed to, or you go in these pods and everything. You can't hear anybody outside the pod, but the music is like boom, right? So, I think it's just, for me, I think it's a great place to be. And then now and I know how to projection map on a building that could be almost photoreal now. It's crazy what you can do, right? So projection mapping or rooms or floors, whatever you want to do is possible right now. So why not have an experience? Because there's so many restaurants right now going out of business here in Los Angeles. It's crazy.
What do you think? What do you think is driving that? Is it just the general economy, or is
yeah, the food costs are nuts. The food costs and the unions and everything. It's just people are just. That's why Ventura County is a better place to have a business if you're going to open up a restaurant. It's just
wow.
So different things like that. So I think that for us, we're seeing an increase. We're working with great agencies like Gut Miami, Gut New York. They're fantastic. We just finished a campaign with RPA, great for AM PM. I mean, I think it's like with the experience and with what's happening now is with the experiential and the AI mixture and everything. It reminds me of when I was in visual effects back in the day, and we just came out with the Flame, and we just had in 3D, and we'd talk about photoreal 3D, and the clients would say it doesn't. They're freaking out. It doesn't look real, Scof. You told me it's going to look real. I'm like, it's the last 15 seconds is going to look real. I mean, the last 15% will look. We got to get there, guys. You got to give me the approval to make it look real. Do you approve or not? And then it's like, then we'd get it done and like, oh my God, it looks phenomenal. It's so photoreal. I've never. I want to just do, So yeah, so we're at this stage right now that we're educating. Like, so we're going to be doing a digital speakeasy series where I'm going to take my brand and have it at a great speakeasy. So we're going to bring the agencies in and client brand direct and everything, and then we're going to bring them in, and I'm going to have guest speakers from agencies and directors, AI, tech guys and everything. We're going to create our own digital speakeasy that we're going to bring on a tour and on the road to teach, rather than try to get into every single agency. Well, I'm in New York. We're going to try and bring them to us for a mixer to teach.
It's really smart.
Yeah. So you have to go out and teach them right now, because certain agencies you talk to, they're so far behind. It's crazy. Or brands, it's like, well, I've been telling them for 2 years, and now they finally go, we need to be in AI. It's like, hello, you're already way behind. I mean, the type of things that are happening for enterprise to build. Well, for Brad, I'm working with him on a project, and it's like, he called me up and he says, what do you think? And I said, I think you should build an entire AI ecosystem and structure on the brand. You got a brand new brand. Let's do everything in AI, website, everything. And he said, and we showed him everything. We did a pitch, and he's like, done. Let's go. So that type of thing. So, but he understands it because he's also been on the side of building out snowboards and anything with an OEM. You know what I mean? Original engineering and that it's we're trying to get into single brand, like a car. If I could wind up getting a call with working with Starlight on the Ford F-150 that's just been moved over to Valtech, and it's going to be that was a complete flop, right? The EVs hurting, but the EVs coming still. Doesn't matter. It's just the positioning and the marketing that needs to take place. And if we could work with a company that is a single, like has a brand, or if I could work on bringing back the new Dodge GTO, if I could work on just that thing, that project, I feel like we could blow it up. No different than we did with BMW films. You just got to put your feet in and jump in the pool, man, because it's coming fast and it's great, and I mean, and the artists that are working in the AI space, they got to know visual effects, and they have to know compositing, and they have to know 3D, because there's still the badging and getting it correct and product correctness and everything. But I'm excited. It's what am I going to do? Can't fight it. So I might as well push forward and learn it.
Yeah. I think that's the optimist perspective is, use these tools to accelerate creativity and take that free time you got back or that money you got back and invest it in, other things. So, the idea that you can, I was talking to a client yesterday who came to me for media, but they needed a lot more foundational work. And mm-hmm. I said, well, guys, I could introduce you to two kinds of agencies right now. I could introduce you to a traditional creative agency, and they're going to take you through, brand positioning and fonts and design language. And they're going to help you figure out what your mission and your values are. And they're going to really, do a whole process to really pull the brand out of you and out of who you are as founders and who you are as people. And that's actually a very important process, because if you skip that, you're skipping on some key foundational elements of like, why do you exist and what do you do for the world?
Yep.
But then there's also this other crowd of entrepreneur that has an idea and they want to meet somebody who can vibe code and have them something that's ready for prime time in 48 hours. And they don't give a shit about the process of what it takes to get from A to Z. They just want fast. They just want to move fast, get something up, try it, iterate, go, learn, build the plane while it's flying, so to speak.
Yep.
And I think there's some, that sounds very appealing, but if you don't do the foundational work of understanding like who you are, what do you represent, what are you going to do for the world, and why are you the person to do it? I think, you're going to see a lot of like zombie corporations out there. You already see it in the AI space. Oh my God, there's so many AI companies that sound exactly the same, and they have stupid names, and they have stupid branding and designing that's very cartoonish and like childish. And it's like, I haven't seen many good AI brands, except like the big ones, right? Like the guys that you kind of, the ChatGPTs of the world, or the Anthropics, or those guys, Claude, all that stuff. So.
Yeah, I mean, those Claude, we're our company right now, we're just really the infrastructure is to just, with Claude and everything, is just, we're building everything we can to just keep us organized through Claude.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing from most people.
We have all our treatments in one place now. We have everything, anything we need. We're like, what do we need? Okay, we got a job in. Let's look at the last 20 treatments we did. Who do we think treatment writer, or what do we think is right? And I mean, I got these videos online right now, all over LinkedIn and IG, and I did 15. I shot 15 videos to talk about our process and everything. I mean, we took my 33,000 contacts that I have in my database, and we put them into AI, and it told us exactly who we needed to hit and what vertical and everything. Yeah, and so we're doing that, and I mean, we're using it big time. So, and I was a guy that didn't like, hey, Lex, get in here. I got something wrong with my computer. You didn't turn the computer on, you idiot. So, Lexi said to me Lexi Stern, she's great. She's up in San Fran. She was with me for 9 years at Zoic. She said, when I finally said, I think it's time you need to move on and spread your wings. And she, do you want me to leave? I said, yeah, I think it's a good time for you, because you're complaining about the other guys not appreciating what you do. And she went off, had a great career. And she was, but what are you going to do? You don't do anything anymore. I do everything for you. I said, trust me, I'll figure it out. And it was the best move, it was a good move for her and me. And it was like, and now it's like with Schofield's, I've learned how to do everything. And now we're building the company bigger and better. And now it's starting to get its wings unfortunately, after my wife passed away. We were just rocking and rolling last year, and then she got sick, and I took 9 months off. So that was a tough one. That was the hardest thing I've ever been through. So if I can get through that, I can get through anything. Because I was in love, and she was a great girl. But now, moving on, and that's somebody that's fantastic. And so it's just like, I got to move on, but and to move on is like to build this company to what I want it to be. With we own IP, I mean, that's another area, if you got your own IP, what you can do to push it through.
On that note, it feels like nostalgia or fascination with the mafia and the mafia story continues. Every time I'm on a plane, if Goodfellas or Casino is one of the options in the headset, I must have watched it. I must have watched Goodfellas 100 times, maybe 500 times. I just don't care. I'll always watch it again.
Yep.
Any of those classic, mafia movies, and then you've got the success of The Sopranos or Peaky Blinders or right now. What do you think it is about mafia or organized crime culture that fascinates the human condition so much to where we just cannot get enough of these stories?
You got the good guys and you got the bad guys, right? And it's same with, the cowboys and, everything back in the day, who wore the white hat and who wore the black hat. But I think everybody, can see themselves as a mobster at one time in their life. Like, man, I wish I was a mobster. I could take care of that guy. I tell you what, So I just think, women love true crime. Love.
Yeah, good point.
So, I mean, I think, I think it's about, I have a girl I've been just started to see, and she's fantastic. And she wants me to take control. She likes me, hey, we're going to Japan. All right, great. Just go, so I think certain women like a man that's a man, and that's what things are sort of, I don't know, I mean, I like the equal parts of 50-50 doing things together and everything else. But I think it's also like, it's like, that's what the gangsters were. They were men, and they, took care of business. I don't know.
I think there's also like, when you live in a world there that has such, I guess, such a distrust of institutions at this point, whether it's distrust of the government, distrust of Congress, distrust of the FBI and the CIA and kind of the, the institutions in which, maybe we once held in such high regard as a society on both sides of the aisle. The idea of a group of people who are willing to go out and cut corners and not listen to those guys and make money. And if you think about sometimes, like, you look at what's happening in parallel to like the tech world, for instance, where, how does a guy like Sam Bankman-Fried build something like FTX and take that amount of money, or Bernie Madoff, or, it's like, there are people who are willing to cut corners to bring their vision, bring their vision into the world as an entrepreneur. And sadly, sometimes they just work out and they figure it out and they never get caught and it ends up okay. Like how many guys did what Sam Bankman-Fried did and then they figured it out and it never imploded, right?
Yeah, thousands. Thank God. Honesty, kindness and honesty, you can't get, it's great. I just think, the gangsters, it's funny. So we got a script sitting on David Kelly's desk right now for Schofield's Flowers, 1919 to 1929. And I branded David's company with his grandmother flying off the rocking chair, you stinker. And so I stayed in touch with David and I reached out and I sent him the script and everything. He got on the line with me. And we got talking. He goes, Steve, this just reminds me, for whatever reason, this reminds me of Goodfellas. And I says, well, great. That's what it is. But it's the Irish version. He goes, why this over another type of he goes, another type of Italian, mob story and everything. I said, because it's about the Irish. And you're Irish, so you should know better, and I said, you're Kelly, right? And I said, you're from Boston. So I said, imagine going into Gibson's in Chicago. Now make that black and white. And imagine you got Nicole Kidman sitting there with a cigarette in her hand and a martini. She's high society and, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, I can get Nicole. I said, no, you can't. That's why I brought up her name. So it's just a funny thing. I said, so I don't know. There's something about I was just reading a story about Dean Martin today. It was in the news. And it was in Apple News, and it was like he had 8 kids, and it was a wonderful piece. And it just talked about from 3 separate wives, and all 8 kids get along great. So that family structure, and that's what the mob was. These mobsters. The Goodfellas was more about the family, right? It was about how they stuck together as a family, even though they were bad guys, right? So. Luckily, I never took that path because I know guys that I grew up with took that path, and I took the cop path, but if you were a kid in my neighborhood and if you were because Chicago is very segregated. So you had Jewish neighborhoods, you had your Irish, you had your blacks, you had neighborhoods, you had your Puerto Rican neighborhoods, you had everything. And then if your sister was dating a different ethnicity, it'd be like, it's like, hey, you mess with my sister, we're going to throw you out of the car back in your own neighborhood. You understand?
Wow,
I didn't say that, but it was like that, where I grew up.
That was the mentality.
So true crime. I just think of the Rat Pack. It's such, great. I grew up with that stuff as a kid. And I met those guys coming into our flower shop. I got to meet Frank Sinatra. I was a little kid, but I got to still meet him like in awe. And I can remember going to seeing the movies,
Yeah, I love it.
Ivan.
Well, Scof, great to have run into you on a street corner in Austin. I knew you had a great story, and I was excited to set up this opportunity to learn more about it. And I think you've always been successful in whatever you've applied your mind to, and I think you will continue to flourish and bloom with your new ventures at Schofield's Flowers. So if folks want to follow along with your thinking or reach out, learn more about the agency, where would you like to send folks?
Yeah, just tell them to go to SchofieldsFlowers.com or, and it's with SCHOFIELDS, flowersplural.com, or you can reach me at Schofield's Flowers on Instagram or Steve Schofield on LinkedIn.
Love it. And for those of you who are watching for the first time, don't forget to give us a follow or a subscribe. If you're listening to the show, a honest review on whatever podcast platform you might be listening on is very helpful to us. And if you know somebody who would enjoy the mafia history component of the episode that we went through during the beginning, or just a great example of a career who's taken many turns and twists, but always ends up on top, and I think probably evolving, I think, is the word that comes to mind. Or maybe a brand marketer out there that has an idea or has an activation that they think is impossible, but Schofield might be able to figure it out. So don't forget to
figure it out for them. I promise.
Let's go. Don't forget to share the show. And with that, Steve, I'll wish you a great afternoon and look forward to connecting with you again in person.
Thank you.